waiting on like the 3, 2, 1. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to join us at this roundtable discussion surrounding housing equity. We're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves, and I will start. I am Bunika Herring, and I am with Battle Creek TRHT.
I'm Isabel Gonzalez, and I'm a high schooler at Battle Creek Central.
I'm Robert Elkert, the Executive Director of the Sheriff Center.
I am Krista Chow-Edwards. I'm the Executive Director of the Calhoun County Land Bank Authority.
I'm Tanaya Reese. I'm a freshman at Kellogg Community College.
I'm Helen Guzzo, Supervisor Account, City of Battle Creek Community Development.
Monique French, I'm the pastor and director at Washington Heights United Methodist Church.
I'm Talia Champlin from Battle Creek Area Association of Realtors, and I work with Remax Parent Associates.
I'm Sunita Virgil, and I am the community liaison at Neighborhoods Inc., case manager, and court liaison as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right, so everyone has watched the housing video that was done for Redefining Race series. Everyone's watched it, correct? So let's talk about it. What came up for everyone while watching this video? Celebrations, comments, questions. What were your thoughts? And we can popcorn it. Just go ahead where you feel. Pastor French?
Well, celebration for us is that we're actually just recently broke ground to start housing development in the Washington Heights area. But it's a great thing to see a need being filled.
Absolutely. And congratulations to you and the church as well. That was nice. Krista?
I think a lot of work has gone on in the community over the years to address some of the barriers. In housing, we certainly at the land bank have had a lot of conversation in the Washington Heights neighborhood around property ownership, what it means, where the land bank could seek additional funding to help folks own property with clear title without some of the encumbrances that used to come with land bank property, such as site clearance dollars. And those really came to light, and we were able to make effective arguments by working with community members and seeing how it affected community folks who were buying properties from us. And land banks were not always traditionally well-funded, so being able to articulate those arguments from the vantage point of residents was super helpful to us.
Good. Thank you.
I would say, where the Sheriff Center fits into this equation is that we're helping people remove the barriers that keep them out of housing, that make it difficult, if not impossible, for them to obtain housing and then maintain it. And so we specialize on removing barriers, including mental health and addiction issues, not having an ID or vital records, any number of those things that can keep people trapped in homelessness. And what we're seeing in our community health needs assessment showed that mental health and substance use issues are the two top priorities in our county, and that's pretty consistent from year to year. So we're trying to remove those barriers because as a society, we expect people to overcome whatever addiction issues they have before they get into housing. And anybody who's lived on the street will tell you that being homeless is traumatizing on a daily basis. And so expecting people to overcome these barriers without the right supports and without being in housing first, it's not really a very reasonable expectation. And so we just try to get folks into the best position so that when the rare opportunity for affordable housing becomes available, they're in the best position to get that and hopefully maintain it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I just want to add, piggybacking off of what was previously being said, is watching that video and just looking at how the partnerships have developed, because people are actually hearing the voice of the people, and partnerships are being established, and agencies are coming together and working together to try to overcome and to eliminate those barriers and provide well-rounded services that people need so that they'll be in the best place possible to maintain.
And that's one thing our community hasn't had a lot of, was actual listening to the voice of the people, the experiences, the concerns, and building those relationships and building that trust. So that's huge in this community right now, and that's something that was definitely needed in Battle Creek. Anybody? Did you guys want to add to the question? And I can repeat it if you want me to.
I thought that was interesting that, it was a good point that it's not accidental, or our housing choices are not just the result of people's choices, but it's really the result of government investment, disinvestment,
Absolutely.
of banks not making loans in certain neighborhoods, so that the wealth of individuals has not been fairly distributed. And
Absolutely.
we can make an argument, an individual argument, that that our housing choices were based on our own choices, and it's really based on a systemic racism,
Yes.
of loans not being available to African American homeowners.
Absolutely.
So we have a much lower rate of home ownership among African Americans than we would have otherwise if Federal Housing Administration and VA loans would have been available.
Very true.
A path to middle class income and home ownership is just not available. And so I think that the video makes a good description of how that happens.
Right.
Because it's hard to understand kind of the systemic reasons why home ownership rates are not as high.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Thank you.
Just to throw a statistic out there, about 40% of the people that we see at the Sheriff Center are Black, and yet they only make up like 10% of the general population, I believe.
Mm.
And so that right there tells you, that there's a certain population that's, not had the same advantages as others. And so that, to me, falls into the category of systemic barriers, racism, HUD's definition of homelessness, the benefits cliff, the lack of affordable housing, and so on and so on. And so we try to help with the personal barriers, but those systemic barriers are those are the ones that are really keeping people trapped in homelessness.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Battle Creek has a population of 52,000, and about 20% of people that live in Battle Creek live in poverty. And housing is a struggle for every one of those lower income families, households.
Absolutely.
Pandemic didn't help.
At all.
No.
At all.
According to United Way, 40% of the households in Calhoun County were already financially unstable before the pandemic, and so you can imagine what the impact of the pandemic was on those households.
Absolutely.
Amanda gave some great numbers about if you purchased a home then, here's what you would have now. And we hear a lot about generational wealth, but home ownership creates wealth for right now, for the generation that's living in the house. The way that people send their kids to college, get an equity line against your equity in your home. The way you make a major repair, get an equity line against the equity in your home. And so if people don't own a home, they don't have anything to fall back on. Some people think that you have to sell the home to get the money.
Mm-hmm.
No. It increases the appreciation, increases the value of the home, and then you can borrow against that for your needs, for your children's needs, for your grandchildren's needs. So if the barriers are up and you haven't been able to take advantage of home ownership, the disadvantages continue.
Yeah. And they keep building and building. Lisa?
What does healthy, inclusive, and equitable neighborhood look like to you?
And we're going to start on this side and go around.
Boy, healthy, inclusive, what was it? Healthy, inclusive, and
Equitable.
equitable. Well, it starts with input, from that community. You can't have an equitable community unless the people who live there have a say in what happens in that community. And I think that's, I don't want to say it's a rarity in Battle Creek, but just nationally, I think that's kind of a thing, where policies are made in a vacuum and the people who are affected by those policies aren't brought to the table. And I think that's like the foundation of creating an equitable community, is making sure that people have a voice.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
I would say where people have choices, so there's not just one housing choice, since our topic is for housing today. We've been in conversations with folks where they wanted to stay in their neighborhood, but there were not other housing choices for them. So they were looking outside of their neighborhood. So I think that's really important, that people have choices and they have, shopping choices as well, not just housing choices.
Tanaya, what does a healthy, inclusive, and equitable neighborhood look like to you? Or you can pass. Yes, we'll come back to you. Helen?
I think that we have a lack of housing choices. We have single-family homes. We don't have enough rental housing. And when we try to build new rental housing, my neighbors say, not in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Rental housing is going to draw down the value of my house. Well, where do people live? We have jobs, like Denso can't hire enough folks.
Right.
The Blue Oval Plan, where are those people going to live? We need to develop more housing. I know I lived on the north side, my first home, I moved out of town and I moved back in and there wasn't a house that I wanted to buy on the north side, so I bought on the south side.
Right.
We don't have new housing choices, so people of all income levels can't find housing. And if you're low income, maybe you're gonna go into a house that maybe doesn't have a certificate of occupancy, or you're gonna enter into a land contract because you're desperate to find housing for your family and you want a backyard for your kids to play and your dog to be fenced in, and so maybe you'll buy a house that you bought at auction, or you'll buy from a slumlord who's selling you a house that doesn't have the quality things that you need because you can only afford a little bit of money.
And even with the lack of housing that we have in Battle Creek, I worked at Denso for 9 years, and a majority of the people that worked at Denso were living in Brookside apartments, which was low-income apartments. You could get a 2-bedroom for $600 or $700, and you had people that were making $60,000 plus living in Brookside because we didn't have houses. Our housing market has been so iffy, is the word I'm going to use, for the last probably 15 years. And COVID didn't make it any better. It didn't make it any better.
Right, so you got higher income folks living in our low income housing.
Yes.
And it creates that there's not enough flow, that everyone, we believe in the trickle down. Well, the trickle down isn't happening because we don't have enough choice. We don't.
Right.
And in many of our neighborhoods, with the land bank and the city have demolished a lot of vacant homes over the last 10 years.
And they haven't built any.
But those vacant lots, it costs $20,000 to $250,000 to build a new house.
Mm-hmm.
But the houses around there are only worth $150,000 to $180,000, and so you can't get a loan to build a new house in the infill housing because you spent $250,000 on the house and it's only going to be worth $160,000 or $180,000.
Yeah.
And so there's no incentive for us to develop the new housing that we need.
Absolutely.
Because there's an economic loss there.
Absolutely. Pastor French?
Would you repeat the question?
Yes, ma'am.
What does a healthy, inclusive, and equitable neighborhood look like to you?
Healthy is one where the most vulnerable is able to thrive. Having access to the health care that is needed, having access to food, being able to address the food that's present, having housing, stable housing, whether it's rental or home ownership, and where children can feel safe, where adults can feel safe, and people are respected.
Yes.
Regardless as to color, gender, identity, whatever, where people can be respected and people can thrive and feel good about calling it home.
Yes. Thank you. Tanya?
If we had an equitable community, we would invest equally in all areas.
Yes.
The little part of the clip where they're driving down a south side street and they're driving down a north side street, come on.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yes.
It's wrong. And it's been wrong for a long time. We handicapped our 40% of our citizens in the 1950s and 60s by building all kinds of brand new houses and only letting white people move to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, because of the redlining, saying to the people who weren't allowed to move, well, sorry, we also can't give you a loan, so you can't fix up the house you already have. And many people can say, well, I didn't do that. I wasn't around when that happened. And that's true, but who can change it? The
That's
only
right.
people that can change it are us.
Absolutely.
The people that are here now. And so I understand that, for instance, your walking path, which is absolutely gorgeous,
Mm-hmm.
your playground, that's on church property, it's not on city property. But why should they have had to raise funds?
Absolutely.
If you go to other neighborhoods, there's already beautiful playgrounds
Mm-hmm.
and, well-funded, taken care of. The garbage man comes and takes the dog poop bags out
Yeah.
twice a week.
It's true.
Yeah, so let's not say that racism and inequities are what used to happen,
Because it's still going on.
because it's still going on.
It's still going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you, Washington Heights, for putting in a lovely walking path, but why should you have had to?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sunita?
Would you repeat the question just to make sure I hit every point?
Yes. What does a healthy, inclusive, and equitable neighborhood look like to you?
Healthy would mean that everyone is comfortable to walk down the street, or children can play outside without fear of whatever the fear might be. Everyone is welcome in the neighborhood. So, if I happen to be driving down certain streets, the neighbors aren't going to stare at me until I'm off their street, and then being able to live in whatever neighborhood that I can afford to live in is equitable to me. And anybody else, whatever you can afford to do, I think should be possible.
Absolutely.
So that's equitable and inclusive. Everybody's welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there... Yes?
Sorry. Okay, I was nervous, my bad. Listening to what everybody said, what makes a healthy neighborhood, I would say safety, most of you said, for the children to be able to go outside without living in fear, or for the adults to be able to socialize or have parties within their neighborhood or their family. I feel like the neighborhood should also feel like a family, not just inside the house, but outside the house as well, and having those resources accessible as well.
Good. Thank you. Are there any projects in Battle Creek's near future in regards to housing that may get us any closer to all the ideal neighborhoods that you just described? And we're going to start this way this time.
I believe that it's possible that things are coming, and I think the city employee could speak to it better than I could, but it's my understanding that there is some housing development coming to Battle Creek
Okay.
that could do what we're talking about, at least start chipping away at the problem,
Okay. Good.
So.
And feel free to pass if you need to pass too.
I don't want to pass on this one. So, I don't blame them, but projects follow the tax incentives. This is systemic. Projects follow the taxes, incentives. Sorry for whoever's recording and has to edit that. And so right now, all the tax credits are for rentals. But after World War II, when many people were coming back and they got their VA eligibility and needed new housing. They didn't build a bunch of rentals. They built homes that people could buy. Now, those can be duplexes, fourplexes, there's lots of condos, but eventually, yes, we need some rentals, and there's some very exciting projects coming in Battle Creek. The one just announced at the old Kmart spot, and the work that they're doing around New Level Sports. But if we want community stability, we've got to have ownership. And all of that ownership was subsidized in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. It was all subsidized. And now that our citizens that have had the most barriers thrown up are told, well, we can't afford to do all those subsidies. Shut up. There should be, Pastor Crunch has worked all this time to build one house, to get one, hopefully 17, right? Or 22 or something, but we need 1,000.
We need 3,000.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
I really think what Pastor French has championed is very hopeful for the future of the Washington Heights neighborhood and for our inner city neighborhoods. So it's very expensive to build housing. Cost of materials and the labor is just really expensive. A 55-unit, one-bedroom apartment building could be $14 to $15 million.
Wow.
That is a lot. The low-income housing tax credit is a federal financing for multifamily housing, and Battle Creek doesn't have a lot of population. We have 52,000, so Grand Rapids, Detroit, the Detroit suburbs take most of those low-income housing tax credits. We received one. It's going to be at the former Kmart site. I think it's 48 units, which should be developed in the next 2 or 3 years. But we had a permanent supportive housing program for folks that have been chronically homeless, unhoused for a long time that did not get funded. 4 permanent supportive housing projects got funded in other communities, one in Kalamazoo. We're hoping we're going to reapply and hopefully another. I sit as the chair of the Battle Creek Housing Commission, and the Battle Creek Housing Commission has started to project-based its vouchers so that it can pay the operating costs of rental housing, because you have to build the housing and then low-income folks have to afford to pay the rent. So if you use a project-based voucher, then it can permanently subsidize the cost of that rent. But you need, I was talking earlier about, it's $250,000 to build a house, and low-income folks can only afford 30% of their income in a rent pay or in a housing payment to become a homeowner. Habitat builds homes, and they get the labor donated, but it's hard to reduce the cost of building houses. Do you build a house without a basement, without a garage? Like, how do you reduce the cost of building that house with the cost of labor and materials increasing? So it really is a catch-22 of where is the subsidy? How do you subsidize the building, of those homes that then can create home ownership?
So I have a question to throw into there. So what are the criteria for tax credit housing? Because I know when I was commissioner, we sat through a conversation that said that there were some properties being denied because they didn't have walkability. And I know they also questioned about our food desert. We do have a huge crisis on our hands, as we have a food desert on 3 of our most populated sides of town.
So the federal low-income housing tax credit is the federal low-income housing tax program. So it's the federal government, and it's then our Michigan State Housing Development Authority, the state government that decides I think it's the qualified allocation plan that they decide. And walkability is one of the things that Michigan, they've lowered that, but I know like the permanent supportive housing program that I was talking about, they weren't located near a pharmacy. So they lost points because they weren't located near a pharmacy. And they probably
Or a
lost
grocery
points
store.
because they weren't near a grocery store. So, you know, we do not have grocery stores or food sources in our inner city neighborhoods.
Right.
You've got to go to Beckley Road and go to the Myers or the Walmart. We do have the Family Fair in Penfield, and we've got Save-A-Lot over near Kellogg Community College. But losing Horrocks downtown was a big loss for our community. I mean, they're prospering from their new site at the mall, but our downtown now doesn't have access to a great grocery store.
Right.
Kind of piggybacking on what you said, that permanent supportive housing project, the proposed site was over on East Michigan Avenue. And the only reason that it ended up over there is because everybody kept saying, not in my backyard, not in my backyard, not in my backyard. So it ended up going in a place that wasn't going to score high on a comparative and competitive application. And so it was just really frustrating to see that. We had the opportunity and we lost it because everybody didn't want it in their neighborhood. So.
And I do remember that conversation coming up, and I believe the other possible site for it was across from the Federal Center, in between the
There was
Federal.
a few, yeah.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, there's a few locations.
And I know there were a couple of them, but there were also concerns about walkability to grocery stores and pharmacy and access to resources. So.
It was just a frustrating thing to see that.
Oh, absolutely. It's very frustrating. And the hard part about it is we don't have grocery stores. I honestly feel like we're not going to get any low-income housing or any of these buildings that we need if we don't have grocery stores. So it almost seems like the obvious quicker fix would be, hey, let's put a couple grocery stores in, one on each side of town. Then these neighborhoods become walkable. Then we can get tax credit housing or incentives to put apartment complexes or permanent supportive housing in. That almost seems like a cheaper fix. It kind of makes common sense to me, like, hey, if we see we have a food desert, which is something we should address anyways, instead of it just being, how can we fix the housing, we have to also fix the fact that we have a food desert. We have people that are taking bus transfers to go to grocery stores, or they're paying higher prices to get shipped to bring it to their house because they don't have transportation. Like, we have to fix all of those things. The pharmacy issue is huge, because we have to make sure that people can get their medication. We have to make sure they can get groceries.
It's advocating for our community as well, though, that I think somebody else touched on that earlier. We have to advocate, like, we have to point out that Battle Creek is different than Kalamazoo, than the surrounding cities too, because I don't know how probable all of this is. We have to keep raising these points, and one of those points is that we have to stay in touch with our local representatives to say, hey, like, you have to, if Michigan, MD, Press, or MSD is the one making these low-income housing tax credit rules, they have to acknowledge that they're, like, it's not one shoe fits all, like one size fits all, right?
Right. It's not at all. Thank you.
We hadn't talked about it yet, but schools. And that's an important part of a community, especially if it's a neighborhood school where generations of social capital have been accumulated because mom went there and grandma went there and great grandma went there. But I don't know if this is, maybe somebody can tell me around the table, but in a lot of places, like where I used to live in Chicago, schools are funded by property tax revenue. And so if you are in an area with a lot of home ownership and nicer houses, your schools get resources. If you're in a neighborhood that's got a lot of subsidized rental housing, your schools don't get anything.
Absolutely.
And so that, and then that, over generation, it just keeps, making the inequity even greater.
Makes the hole bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Krista?
So I'd like to touch on something that Helen was talking about and take it in a little bit of a different spin, if that's okay, as far as projects go. Because I feel like we've covered most of the projects that are going on in the community. So what the land bank brings to the table here, and where we're trying to assist the process of development, because Helen is correct, development costs are here, and the appraisal values are not always going to make it in our neighborhoods. But we know that we do need attainable housing for folks. So we have been trying to work through some of those pre-development hurdles to make sites ready for development. So clearing title or doing the environmental reports, doing the surveys, and then getting support from communities where they want to see infill housing go. So our biggest work has been in the Washington Heights neighborhood because we do have an advisory committee there, but we're also in conversations with Post Franklin right now, where we also own a lot of property as to whether or not they want to do a similar thing as far as where should infill housing go, which lots should be used, and how should they be disposed. But some of the challenges in our community aren't just about how much it costs to build, or are folks ready to buy? Do we have home ownership counseling, which NIPC does provide? It also is around zoning. We have a ton of R1B zoning, which requires a 50-foot lot width, which works in some of our areas, but does not work in Post Franklin, where those lots are 33 feet wide.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge challenge. And then it's also a challenge to build denser housing. So if we want to see those duplexes or those fourplexes, you know, those are not always going to be permitted without some type of zoning change. And so it's, from a development standpoint, I feel that there are a couple of issues that we need to work through as a community, and getting that community support, as many of us have mentioned, about where should these types of uses go, and you know, how should we talk about them as far as you know, rental, home ownership, things like that. I think those conversations still need to happen.
Okay, that's good to know, because that I did not realize that.
Well, one of the things that we're talking about with New Level Sports is the accessory dwelling unit, which is an ADU, right? Sometimes called the granny flat way back in the day. It's a second unit, usually above a garage, which could be a mortgage helper for a homeowner because it would be a rental. But it has to be attached. It has to be on an attached garage to that primary unit. So it can't be a detached garage, which doesn't quite make sense to me. Right. If we have an alley, you could have that. So just kind of talking through some of those zoning things and what that makeup might look like, and where you might be able to add some of those denser housing styles that would bring in those choices for folks in our community.
Thank you. Robert, anything else to add?
Oh.
Okay.
Good conversation.
I actually live in Washington Heights, and I'm excited to hear about what is coming. So, like, what has the community and outreach look like in neighborhoods that are getting new developments that can be like in Washington Heights or in other neighborhoods?
And how's the communication going as well?
I'll just jump in. So we set up an advisory committee, or our board elected to go that route, our board of directors, and we took nominations. And so there's an advisory committee that helped create a disposition plan for the sites that we own within that neighborhood planning council. So the neighborhood planning council number 2. Our biggest concentration of properties is in the Washington Heights neighborhood, about 250, mostly vacant parcels. I think communication is always a challenge. It's just as far as like, you know, how are we communicating with folks? Doing it on Facebook, doing it through this email list that we have, you know, compiled over the 3 years that we've been working there. And I think there's always room for improvement with communication. I think Dr. French, you have a much more direct line in communication than we do. Next time I throw it to you.
So one of the things that we did was we really built relationships with people in the community. And so we do have those community forums where we bring people to the church. We provide information about resources in the community. We also did a needs assessment with the people in the community, to where we were actually able to hear what the community desired, what they wanted. So we got that information, and we just listened to the heart of the people in the community. We're really big about building those relationships and communicating that information. We do lunch and learns where they're able to come and have a meal, break bread, learn about some of the service providers in the community. We also build relationships with some people in the community who have a desire to address some of the needs that we discussed earlier, like the food desert. I know that Mr. Singh owns the building on the corner and is desiring to bring a grocery store that can address that food desert. I know that Devon Wilson has the Sunlight Garden, and they're looking to partner and kind of work together to address some of those issues, as well as the church. With the food desert, we provide meals on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Sundays to people in the community. And it doesn't matter about your socioeconomic status. We just open it up for people to be able to come and build relationships over a meal. And so those things are important, building those relationships. And we, like the services that are needed, I know we recently established a relationship with NIBC so that they can provide the home ownership classes, at the church. We have the MOU with the Calhoun County Land Bank, and they also were holding their advisory meetings at the church because we're really big on trying to get that information out to the community. I know people have been just talking about just the one house that's going to be built, but we're actually looking at 17 new houses that'll be built for single families.
Awesome.
Which, because I am a person of faith, like everybody's just focusing on, well, they got only enough money to build one house. Well, we're going to build 17 houses because I believe that God is going to provide.
Amen. Love that. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about our past inequities. What is being done to address past inequities within the housing community? For example, segregation patterns or redlining. And I know we touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to see if there's anything else to add to that.
I think we can speak to the amounts of investments with our through our LEP program and leveraging minor home repair and healthy homes dollars. Like we're paying for rehab that over, that exceeds the value of the home. And
So the city of Battle Creek has or Community Development Division of the city of Battle Creek has 2 rehab programs. One is a minor home repair, and we replace a lot of roofs. Like we've done almost 100 this year. We did 36 last year. About 50% of the funds that we spend are in helping roofs. And so a lot of long-term homeowners they've deferred maintenance. They have enough money to pay the taxes and the electricity and the operating expenses, but they don't have enough, and they can't get a loan to replace that roof. And so I see that every roof that the city of Battle Creek replaces through the Community Development Block Grant, we prevent a vacant house from coming, because when a roof leaks, it destroys the integrity of the house.
Right.
So, we've done about 45 roofs this year, and the city of Battle Creek has invested $400,000 to $1 million each year in the Community Development Block Grant. About a third of our Community Development Block Grant dollars is spent in the minor home repair program. So we have tried to help long-term homeowners maintain home ownership through replacing the furnace and the water heater. And I know Community Action also takes federal resources and does the federal and state resources and does the same thing. And most of our houses were built prior to 1978, which means that they have lead-based paint. And lead-based paint is hazardous to children. As windows open and close, as doors, all those friction surfaces create lead paint. And if you're not a good housekeeper, or maybe you are a good housekeeper, but your kids are sucking on the windowsills, or are just too many kids, their intellectual development is harmed by lead-based paint. And so we've done 130 homes over the last 5 years of blood remediation. Usually those are kids, homes with kids 6 and under, because kids under 6 are the ones that have the hand-mouth, that they put their hands in their mouth. And so it's just really important for families when they buy that older fixer-up house to realize that when they start thawing and
it's coming out,
they create lead dust, and lead dust is hazardous to the kids, and lead poisoning can affect people of all incomes, but especially low-income folks that don't have the resources otherwise to maybe fix up their home. But it's lead-based paint in older house was built before 1978 is a real threat to kids' health. And we have a lead remediation program that kids go to the health department or their pediatrician and they get tested. If you're on Medicaid, we can help by rehabbing that home.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
We also have assistance available that we help with the rehabs as well. If you were impacted, and majority of people were impacted from the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. So we received some funds from MISTA. So we're able to assist 66 in the area, the 49037 zip code. And then because we talked about the partnerships, if we're not able to assist, we do refer them to the city of Battle Creek so that people appear to get the assistance that they need. We refer them to the city of Battle Creek or NIBC, so we just try to make sure that people get access to the resources they need.
Thank you. You have anything to add to that?
I was just thinking as everyone was talking that under the current leadership at Neighborhoods, we are definitely into partnering with our community, and there's lots of stuff being discussed that we want to bring to the community, still in the planning stages, but we're definitely trying to make a difference, trying to make it better.
Wonderful. And I think the community is definitely seeing these partnerships evolve and come about, and it's definitely building more relationships and building trust in Battle Creek where there was no trust. So that's a good thing, and that's definitely a step in the right direction.
I do have one thing to add. Something that grew out of our work with the Washington Heights Committee is we're looking at heir property and legacy properties. So we occasionally have folks come to us interested in properties that were owned by their families that went through foreclosure, and we don't really have a program that addresses that. And so we have invited in the Center for Community Progress, but at the same time, the County Treasurer's Office, who also sees folks who come in that may live in a family home but not have title to that home because it didn't go through probate, and they're at risk of foreclosure, but if they pay the taxes, they're still not getting title to that property. They're very interested in starting a program called Homes for Generation, which is being run in Washtenaw County. So we're joining forces, the treasurer and the land bank, and we're working with the Center for Community Progress. We actually had our first meeting at Dr. French's church a couple of weeks ago, so we're just at the very beginning of this. But some of the conversation that came up at that community meeting wasn't just around these two populations of properties, but also how can we educate folks upstream about planning? Because as we talk about generational wealth, once you get the home, how do you make sure it stays in your family, right? How do you make sure you don't lose it? So we having those conversations too, which I think kind of gets back to making sure that families can keep those properties and grow that wealth.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I would just like to add that the communication, you just can't do it enough. You know, I think the shopper and the radio and TV and whatever, it just has to be ongoing. I mean, you can assume that you've communicated or whatever. And I go to meetings. I go to a lot of meetings, and I
see you in a lot of meetings.
I still hear stuff that I'm like, I didn't know anything about that, you know. And so communication in our community is not the best. There's like pockets, and it depends on who you know sometimes and what circles you travel in or whatever. So to the land bank in the city, communicating in every single bit of media, not just social media, but just the plain shopper that goes to most everybody's home and most neighborhoods, you know, I just have to advocate for that. We really need to do a better job.
I would like to build on that, Sunita, because that the heirs and legacy properties, that was a great presentation, very well done, great conversations at the tables. And one of the biggest conversations was how many people would have enjoyed being there if they had known anything about it.
Absolutely. I had never heard anything about it.
We had a function that night at my church. It was the exact same night at the exact same time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I would have loved to have gone for that.
Yeah,
You know?
and we heard about that kind of after it was already planned, and we thought, what can we do about it? But there was no way to.
Yes. Yes.
It's
and
hard.
that's where the communication piece comes in. Like, hey, we're doing a big event on this night. We think that the population of your church or your school or your neighborhood would need to be there. What else is going on?
Yes, and if we could communicate through the schools even, you know, to get in their newsletters or whatever, you know, so that we reach those parents that may not have time to go to these meetings.
Or aren't on social media.
And they're not on social media because they're working or whatever.
And then another piece of it is that a lot of times when I go to things, the people that have been invited are churches and nonprofits, very, very important community partners. But I'm sorry, businesses are the ones that have the money.
Businesses need to be invited as well.
Businesses, there was a housing meeting a couple weeks ago, and I said, may I please come to this? And I was told, no, we're starting with the churches and the nonprofits, and they'll do something for businesses later. And I'm thinking,
We should all be in the same meeting.
well, I said I was thinking this, but that doesn't make sense to me. Why
Why
would
the
you
segregation?
Not? Yeah, why the segregation?
Right.
Right. And businesses, churches and nonprofits get their money from people making money.
Yes.
And so I think that's a mistake in our community.
Absolutely.
That just goes to show who else needs to be at the table. Absolutely.
I control or I supervise community development block grant and federal home investment partnership programs, but the city of Battle Creek has been pretty, in response to the Flint water crisis and lead in the water. They've applied, our water division has applied to the state revolving water fund, and we're going to make a $25 million investment in the post neighborhood. So in the next 3 years, every lead service line, galvanized steel, and lead lines are going to be replaced. And so I think that the post addition, and they're going to raise the water meters out of pits as part of that. And the promise is at the end of the 3 years that the city will use state funds and federal funds to repave all the streets. So there's going to be a lot of sewer work, a big inconvenience. Replacing all the galvanized steel and lead service lines in the post addition in the next 3 years. They just announced it. It'll be starting soon. And then 3 years from now, all of the roads and the gutters will be repaved. So it's a major commitment. The city is bonding $12 million or $12.5 million, and the other will be a grant once the work gets done. So it's through state funding. For our infrastructure. Our infrastructure is aging, especially in our older neighborhoods.
Yes.
So when you drive through Lakeview and Post Addition or Washington Heights, part of it is that it's a much older neighborhood. That infrastructure is from the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. It's not from the 70s and the 80s. So I know that there is a major investment coming in water infrastructure in the Post Addition.
Oh. And if I remember correctly, some of the ARPA funding went towards the infrastructure as well, which is good.
I wish this was taught in schools because I'm still learning what segregation and redlining is. And I could buy a house or an apartment in a historical redlined area and be a victim of housing discrimination and not even know it. So I just wish this was helped. I wish there was more for the youth so we can help change it.
And also so y'all could learn about it. So
But honestly, Isabel, I used to teach for housing for the Battle Creek Area Association of Realtors, and I didn't know about it. When we brought Rothstein in 2019, before he got here, I read his book, The Color of Law, and was shocked to discover, I've been a realtor for 42 years, and I just assumed that people lived where they wanted to live, and not, I know.
I have to laugh.
Yeah, of course you have to laugh. I had to cry, but I looked it up, and we have, as neighborhoods were being built,
Mhm.
It's written.
said,
Follow the
you
language.
you can only sell to Caucasians.
Yeah.
And that makes me sick to even say out loud, but that's in my lifetime.
And I feel like
So-
it's still going on.
Well, and you're not learning about it in school.
At all.
And I didn't learn about it in school either. And when I did learn about it, it made me sick and made me want to do something. Everybody should know. I agree with you.
And youth are invited to the event. There's a housing event coming up, and I'll make sure that you get some information and maybe can pass it to some more young people, because it's definitely something that you guys need to know about.
I think the thing too about Richard Rothstein's book that for me, I mean, I have a master's degree in urban planning. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying it was eye-opening on many different fronts.
Yes.
Is the instability that Robert shared around if you don't have a stable place to live, or if you're constantly fighting code, and I totally get why code is needed, right? I absolutely understand that, but if you have to go to eviction court every day or every other day, and your kids don't have a stable place to live, and that came up in the video as well, if your kids don't have a stable place to live, for me, it made me think about it differently. So it's a good place to start. It really made me think differently about some of the things in our field. And almost every day out there was one yesterday that I was reading, I think in the Washington Post, about land being taken for, from an African American community for a university. I mean, the stories are prevalent.
So I shouldn't say this in light of what you just said, but I actually went to the University of Chicago. And if you know anything about the University of Chicago, it is a gentrified island of affluent white people in the middle of some of the most low-income neighborhoods in Chicago. And it's been that way since they built it in whatever it was, or early 1900s possibly. But yeah, I mean that to me it's so glaring, and to see that on a daily basis was really, really eye-opening. I learned a lot about different ways that, it's no longer legal to redline or, whatever else, but there's so many different ways that policymakers will engage in gentrification and other more subtle forms of housing discrimination. The one I saw a lot when I was in Chicago was closing neighborhood schools in black and brown neighborhoods.
Which is still going on.
It's still going on. I'm hopeful for the new mayor. He's a Chicago Teachers Union guy, but yeah, I mean, I saw that over and over again. Schools being taken out of the communities, generations of social capital being wiped out, which was largely the only resource, the most valuable resource a lot of these folks had. And so if it's not redlining or restrictive covenants, it's going to be education policy or some other policy or some other way of gentrifying communities that we always have to be fighting against. And it's frustrating because they'll always find another way.
Yeah, that was really pointed out in that book. I happened to be reading White Spaces, Black Hoods.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
It was
sure.
pointed out how once we overcome those systemic barriers that are placed, the systemic racism that's put in place, once it's dismantled in one form, it arises in another. Yeah.
It's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to just point out how in doing the research for here in the city of Battle Creek, and it was talking about the bottoms, and that was just heartbreaking how it depends on the population, what they classify a community. How the bottoms was classified as the slums, and then there was 280 families that were displaced, and they were more or less directed to the Washington Heights community.
And no housing built for them or anything like that. Just that was redlined already. And so houses that were single family had to be turned into duplexes and fourplexes, and people had to be stuffed in there. So 280 families shoved into Washington Heights, which was already full.
Mhm.
And it was more expensive housing than when
Yeah,
they were
living
living
on.
in.
Mhm.
So,
But those single-family homes became multiple-family homes, and
Yes,
then they stopped investing into the community.
yes. So how has the lack of representation in certain fields, particularly among the marginalized communities, impacted the overall progress and inclusivity of these spaces? That was a mouthful. I didn't write that question.
No,
That's
say
a
that
mouthful.
So,
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
is gonna make me pretty unpopular, I'm sure, but.
You were already
I
unpopular.
know,
So.
I believe that, and Helen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that had there been engagement with the service providers and the people who would be living in this permanent supportive housing project, that we would have put together a more competitive application, might have had a better chance of getting funding, but that didn't happen. And so that's one example of how we can do better,
Yeah.
going forward.
I agree with that.
I think that if all the realtors were white, that there's a certain lack of distrust if when,
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Look, I'm so glad you said that.
there's a huge lack of trust when you look at all the people that could help you purchase a home and nobody
Looks like you.
Yeah.
And I personally have been working very hard on that. It's a hard business to get into because it takes so much money to get started, and you're working completely on commission, so there's no income. So I get that, and people of advantage are the ones that can afford to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but we've got to work harder there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I went to a forum and I liked the way it was said. Actually, the equity officer, Kim Holly, made this statement, and I love the way she phrased it. She said that a lot of times we talk about equity and inclusion. She said a lot of times people, it's like being invited to the party, but not being asked to dance.
Oh, yeah, true.
And that's what
That's
I see
good. I like
happening.
that.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. That's what I see happening a lot. People invite you to the table or they'll invite you to spaces, but they don't include you. They don't ask you to dance.
You
Yes,
become just
So
a
you have
token
to-
at the table.
Yes.
I've been there many times.
Same.
I think just having a lack of representation in these like policy making tables is like you can really see when someone does come, just like that does look or is representing a minority group, the resistance from the
Oh,
table.
absolutely.
Well, this is new. We've been doing this like this
And it's not
for
working.
X
Yeah.
amount of years, and it's fine. Well, how about you do it like this, or have like lived experience to do it like this other way? It's just you can see that uncomfortableness like kind of come up, or it just gets pushed aside. Like people don't want to, I guess, try something new sometimes, or if they are willing to listen, you have to restructure and rebudget, and so it takes years to see, I guess, an advancement from like where we are now to include people that have been left out for a long time.
So, and I'm going to say the unpopular thing. So, we have a problem with our local leadership as well. Our local leadership does not look like the majority of the people that it represents. And I feel like Battle Creek truly saw this during the pandemic when we actually had a commission that looked very representative of what our community looks like. There was a difference in the amount of money and funding that went into neighborhoods that had been passed over for I don't know how many years. Like, that's the difference. There has to be some kind of representation. And like you said, a lot of realtors are Caucasian. I know a few that aren't.
I think there's 3.
It's very minute. And there's a problem with that because when I went to look for a house, who was I going to go to?
Right.
And I was shown certain houses. or I called about certain properties, and it's like, well, there's a house over here that look, you could probably afford over here. Like, you're directed in certain areas. And I'm just thankful that I had my daddy's money to go for the house so that I could be in the area that I'm in now. But when I went on my own and grabbed a realtor to go look at properties, I was directed in certain places. You know, I'm a single mother, I'm disabled, you know, and it's like, how do you know where I need to be? So there is a communication issue, and Pastor French talked earlier about building these relationships and building trust. There is a lack of trust within people of different cultures and backgrounds in this community for good reason. Like, we have reasons, the community has reasons to not trust our leadership and the people that are making the decisions for us. But what are we going to do about it? And we do get invited to the table, so it looks like people are being equitable. There's a lot of places where people are invited to the table, but you're silenced at this table. You're sitting there like a pretty little affectionate token, you know, warm body, somebody that says, oh, we're trying, yay. But are you really, though?
That's what you call a dog and pony show.
It's a dog and pony show.
Yeah, and that's the definition when you go to the dictionary, that's the definition of insanity. Keep doing the same old thing, thinking you're going to get a different result.
Absolutely. And you have to look at how it affects people. So if I'm telling you my story and you don't relate to it, or it doesn't affect you and you've never experienced it, it's not going to hit you the same. It's just not. There are some empathetic people out there. There are some people that absolutely don't give two craps what you're going through because it does not affect them and their household. And that's why we have to make sure there's representation in these spaces, not just of race or culture, but of socioeconomic status, you know, of identity. Like, there's a need for it. There's a need for it. Even in our local leadership, there's a need for it. But the people that want to be in it are kept at arm's length by all the systemic crap that goes on, in quotes. I'm gonna hush on that. Whew. Yeah,
They can believe that.
I said crap. That's better than what I would have normally said. Like,
How can communities who may be non-English speaking get access to this information or be included, and how can we get involved in these conversations?
Oh, well, I think for folks who may not be English speaking, to go to their neighborhood, so whether it's the Pharma Center or the Congolese group or versus wherever, go directly to them, reach out to them. If the communication, the material can be printed in their language, do it, you know. I think that back to that communication again, reaching to the young people, going through the schools is a good way to get, especially the high schools, to get the young people that are getting ready to go out into the world to reach those folks. KCC, local colleges, you know, those young people, communicate directly with them. I think being intentional in that communication with the different groups makes a difference.
I think you really have to support those organizations that work with those different populations because, you know, one of the things that worries me, you know, when I look at our demographics at the Sheriff Center, I know that the Latino population is underrepresented, that there's more homeless Latino population out there than what we're seeing. And we've translated our stuff into Spanish. Thank you, Michelle. And I gotta believe that part of it is, like going back to what you said, distrust, especially if you're not documented. I mean, you're gonna go to a place where you're gonna ask for help, and in an environment now where, especially in these days, where it's just really not very friendly to people who are documented, let alone people who aren't. So it's just, it creates, you know, that's just another issue that you have to deal with. How do we let these communities know that they can trust us, that we're not interested in anything but providing them the help that they need, and not, you know, have this fear of, you know, that they're going to be reported or something like that.
Isabel, how do you think we could get more youth to be involved in these kinds of conversations?
I would say through social media, because a lot of youth are on social media, and through the schools. Have assemblies talk about it, because we are, especially at high school, because I'm 17 and I'm going to be 18 in a couple months, and maybe I want to move up, get a house or an apartment. So like, I want to know,
Just making some stuff that.
I think we should host like different workshops too, whether it's like free to get involved, whether it's like we can have like different breakout sessions and discussing like the different topics we've been talking about, or like she said, social media, or I don't know, I would say like setting like brochures out within the schools, or like doing newsletters also, so that they can be more stressed out and
Good.
Can I ask a clarifying question? When you say social media, what do you mean?
They're probably not talking about Facebook.
Let me ask
That's what we see. The 40-plussers see Facebook
Yeah,
and
that's
social media.
I'm not going to date myself, but
It's not.
like
I remember MySpace.
They're bringing that back, by the way, Robert. Yeah.
what do you mean?
mine, and maybe like creating like videos, or like
For
creating
TikTok?
like reels, like Instagram reels.
Oh, Instagram reels, yeah.
If that makes sense.
So all of the media, in other words.
All right, ladies and Robert.
Just whatever you do, don't try to come off as cool. 'Cause
Right.
you're just gonna
You're
I
just
never
not.
even tried.
Or like, what would you think? Like,
I would say like flyers, ads, especially on TikTok, videos, Instagram reels, something like, stuff like that.
Do you feel like it should come from adults or should it come from other youth?
From you.
Okay.
I feel like if you talk about it, then you'd be like more interested.
Okay. And maybe while we're doing workshops for homeowners and stuff, maybe we need to do a youth workshop about how do you become a homeowner one day, or what steps you need to take, almost like some preparation.
And we need some youth influencers.
Yeah.
Bam, gotcha. You came to the table, now we gonna dance with you.
That's
We're
right.
gonna dance just a little bit.
Yes.
I was just gonna say Battle Creek, when they did their ARPA fund meetings and they had all their community conversations, it wasn't until I brought up that like there isn't the issues that the people that were bringing up there, and I know you were at this meeting with me, they weren't the same as the issues that me and Dee had, right? And so I'm like, why isn't there like a space that could be more centered around you, so that we feel comfortable talking about what we want, because it's gonna be completely different than what the next generation wants, or even the next generation below us, or our kids, right? And so that's really important, like partnering like in-person activities too, like don't just think because you're putting media out there that they're gonna consume it, or it's gonna retain, but really hosting like in-person events like you guys are already doing right now with the community outreach, and reaching people who have that access to the youth that are like in the middle, right? I think that's really important.
Can I
Good.
say something real quick, just real fast? I know I'm not supposed to be talking. But I will say, based on the footage of the younger folks that we've talked to, a lot of them felt unprepared to venture into the housing market, whether it be renting or owning. And I feel like this is a good jumping point, like Bonika mentioned, to get them into the conversation early, because the last thing that we want is for us to keep having these conversations and keep hearing the same thing, like Dr. French said as well. And I also feel like for a lot of young people, homeownership isn't even something that they're thinking about or think that they can do.
Absolutely.
So making it like digestible and not as intimidating is like a huge thing that I think will help a lot.
And let's talk about the trauma that you picked out from 18 to 28 who had to rent, right? Who've experienced housing discrimination, who've experienced probably going back and forth between parents' houses, right? Are you going to college? Are you going to an apartment? Are you going to a friend's house? Roommates, things like that. All of the traumas they've had to experience, and so do they really, is home ownership something appealing to them, or is it another level of barriers and struggle and trauma that's going to be added to their plate? And what's the easier route? Right?
That makes me think, so, you know, we've been talking a lot about home ownership, but the reality is for most folks, especially now, I mean, because home ownership is like a pipe dream for a lot of people, but, I mean, most people don't move out of their parents' house and buy a house, you know, you rent for a few years usually, and you try to rent a place that allows you to save up money so you can make that down payment for the house. But it's gotten to the point where people are paying more in rent than they would pay on a mortgage payment. And so it's creating a situation where people are never going to have enough money to you know, be able to make that down payment.
That's a big one.
That's a huge one. And even with Social Security, if you draw Social Security, you don't make 3 times a rental amount. I'm one of those people. I was drawing Social Security. My check, because they were missing paperwork, got deferred for 2.5 months. I was evicted from my townhouse. And so then once that check started, they gave you all your back. But it's like, okay, I've been evicted.
Yeah, now you're really,
Now I can't get anywhere to stay.
Right.
And when I was looking, you don't make 3 times. And so when I worked at neighborhoods as a housing specialist, we had people calling every single day like, hey, you have a landlord that'll work with me. If you have disability, there's nothing for you. There's nothing. If you have an eviction, there's nothing for you. If you have a felony, there's nothing for you. If you need more than 3 bedrooms because you have more than this many, there's nothing for you. And then we had a lot of landlords that just the discrimination alone about receiving a rental voucher, they turn me down every single day. I'm not taking any more vouchers.
Yeah.
You're getting money. You're getting paid for it. Like, what's going on?
A challenge, though, I want to say from the landlord's standpoint, a challenge is I called my property manager and said, I want 20% of my properties to go to convicted, nonviolent felons. And they said, tell you can't do that. That's discrimination. It's the right kind of discrimination.
It's the right kind of discrimination.
But I said, okay, I want 20% of my, or 25% or 40, I can't remember. I was trying to balance my population of renters, and apparently only lenders are allowed to
specify that.
Discriminate the other way.
Yeah.
And so fair housing is unfair because they won't let you give additional advantages to anyone either.
But
it's
I
absurd.
believe in that situation, your property manager has the discretion from you that if that person does come through the door, then they can rent to that person. You know what I mean? Which is wonderful.
But the challenge, she said, if they've got a waiting list,
you have to go
then you can't give it to the felon.
You
have
to go down the list, and you have to work the
opportunity.
process.
I go to landlord-tenant court every day, Monday through Thursday, and I see these folks with children, and sometimes they're on Social Security being evicted, you know, and they could have different issues. And just the opportunity to be able to rent is a big deal. And so, waiting list or no, that's still a good thing.
And that's not even counting for the tenants that have past due utilities. If you owe a water bill or an electricity bill, like, you cannot, your lease becomes void the second you don't pay your water bill. And I know that from history as well, like past experience. Like, those things will keep you out of an apartment. Any kind of owed or anything in the credit bureau from old utility bills as well. Yes, sir.
Not to make it personal, but like with you being a college student, like it is hard to like find housing for us. I know like the number one barrier is housing. Like majority of the college students at KCC are either staying with their parents or they're staying like across the street from KCC. I know it's called like
In the annex.
Yeah. But like before, like Victoria said, it's about the trauma because like I'm bouncing from house to house right now, trying to find like somewhere stable for me. Since I am like a low income student, because I don't make I don't make a lot because I'm working at KCC. But I feel like just talking around, I know there are a few low-income apartments or like low-income housings, but
They don't take college students.
They don't
Yeah.
at all.
Yeah.
Or you have to have a co-signer,
yeah.
Right.
and it's usually a parent.
So, thank the Lord, I have been able to find. I am going to be moving into the annex, but yeah, it's just about just getting those resources and also hosting like youth workshops as well, or like having a youth summit in towards like housing. I think that would be good because I definitely came up prepared tonight. But
You're doing great.
but I would say not really trying to compare, but like to Kalamazoo, like they have like college housing,
Mhm.
well, college student housing. And, to pick that off, hopefully in the future, like Battle Creek could have like housing opportunities for college students and low income
Yes.
people as well. Yeah.
To build on that, kids that want to take advantage of a legacy scholar can't because they need to go to somewhere that has housing too.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about youth, right? I mean, God forbid you go to college and get a college education because you're going to pay for that for the rest of your life. And, I mean, I know for me, like my monthly payments for a while there were over $1,000.
Yeah.
And, it was just like, for what? Because I went to school and tried to better myself. And so, if you're going to straddle young people with all this debt, and then how are they going to buy a house? How are they even going to rent an apartment?
Sure.
Yeah, I think just to answer Asa's question real quick, from like a personal experience as well, and is that like stay curious. I think one of the best things that has helped me understand how I can better my economic situation and advocate for like the people I care about, which is everyone. But it's staying curious. It's like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, if you're going through a process yourself, like even applying for colleges or transferring or looking for housing, like, how does this work from A to Z? Like, how do people get here? And ask questions to those like professionals, or like the employees, and see what they say. And any time that you go to like things like this, like pass your email along to them and say, hey, like sign me up for any like future events that are happening or any newsletters that you guys might be sending out. Just remember to open them and kind of like read them and just see what kind of questions come up for you, and talk about it within your groups. Like normalize bringing up these types of conversations with your friends or your family members, like your cousins or siblings. Like, hey, have you guys experienced this? Or like, what is your experience? Have you looking for housing? What's that been like? Because there's, that I think has been super helpful for me. And then sharing information is key. Mm-hmm. And shadowing people, like asking people, what do you do for a living? Like, because I know as like first generation for me, like my parents instilled in me, like you have to become a doctor or a lawyer. Like that's what we expect of you. And so I never branched out to understand like getting a master's degree in planning or in urban planning, or like never looked at any other degrees that maybe like would have inspired more passion inside me or something. So
There's still time. I didn't do it until I was in my 30s. But,
Sorry.
Your comments have opened up a whole new area of housing for me that I didn't realize we were missing. And it's making me think of actually a project I saw in Chicago when I went to a conference there where they did co-op housing, and it was really aimed at the younger generation because students in Chicago could not access housing. And so they were each renting like a room, but they had everyone shared the same common areas, but the whole point was that students learned how to manage money and then they had opportunity to buy into property owned by that group, in the future. And I thought that was so brilliant because it provided stable living arrangements while they were in school, but also all of those wraparound services for young folks that we're talking about here today, right? How to pay those bills, how to manage that money, and then there was, folks within that nonprofit that were providing those services, mentoring the folks living in that house.
Almost like supportive housing.
Yeah,
Is it on the north side?
It was Inglewood.
Inglewood, okay, good.
Yeah, there's also a really great project there called the Golden Map Project, if you ever want to look it up to learn about disparities.
Just as an anecdote, they opened a Whole Foods in Inglewood in Chicago. I mean, who could afford to shop there,
Right.
It was like- At least there's a grocery store.
Right. So my next question is, what are some ways we can continually build trust and engagement with our marginalized communities in certain fields or industries? Because I know we've talked about communication, we've talked about making sure we're getting information where people need to see it, whether it be social media or in the churches or in the nonprofits. How else can we build engagement tonight?
I would say networking and building those connections with each other.
Okay, thank you.
I think including businesses, like Callie said, ensuring that everybody's at the table, and then if the moderator has to do it, if it's a table setting like this, that moderator ensures that everybody's asked to dance, and that person's opinion is counted. You know what I mean? Heard, documented, whatever it has to be, so that it could be sent out in a communication that, whether it's an email or whatever, but so that it could be read and then shared and so on.
Okay, good. Thank you. What else?
Show up.
Show up. Yeah.
Be accountable. I appreciate that in you, Krista. You just go so many places that I wouldn't necessarily expect you or the land bank to be, but you're there, you're listening.
The other thing that occurred to me during someone else's comments is that as leaders, we should hold other leaders accountable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think as government and businesses, we need to create more opportunities for internships for young people to learn what government's about, what businesses are. I think those internships, difference between an employed and unemployed college graduate is the internships that they've done, the relationships that they've built along the way, and just other things that made me think about, it's easy when you look at housing affordability that, we just need to expand the voucher program, the Section 8 rental assistance program. We just need to expand that. But then when you work or you're on the board of a Battle Creek Housing Commission and you realize that only 1 in 10 vouchers that when they're issued get actually utilized because landlords don't want to take them.
Absolutely.
And so because they're a source of income discrimination, maybe people have past evictions or other issues, but the most successful households are that when they're finally issued, they've been on the waiting list, they finally get issued, their existing landlord who they have a relationship with will take a voucher, and that is the most successful households finding vouchers is when their current landlord is willing to take them. But it's too often people search for 60 to 90 days and then they have to
and then the voucher expires.
And the voucher expires, right? You have 60 days and then you can get extended, but people can't wait to start that housing search, and they have not, too often they're not successful. So Absolutely. It's not the solution to housing affordability that policymakers think it is.
And so one thing I noticed when I was at neighborhoods as well, there were I want to say at one point, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people with vouchers that couldn't find anywhere to stay, and they were leaving Battle Creek. They were going to Albion, or they were going to Marshall, or they were going to Kalamazoo, or even further than that, just to be able to utilize and try again for a voucher. And that was a hard thing because you never want to send people outside of Battle Creek. You don't.
And we've got we've got a number of individuals and families, particularly who are in what I call hotel limbo, because they will understandably spend whatever income they have, getting a place where they have their own room, their own bed, their own shit. Especially if you have kids and they're in school, it's understandable why you would do that. Problem is that you spend all your monthly income, you never have enough money for first month's rent deposit for rental, let alone the application fees that are usually non-refundable. And you fill out 5 applications, you're in the hole $100, and this for a lot of families, that's just not even reasonable at all. And so they end up just going through the hotel, and they stay in the hotel for 3 weeks, and then they're homeless for a week, and then they go back to the hotel for 3 weeks, and then so until there's some way to throw a monkey wrench into that cycle by making renting more affordable and then making home ownership more affordable, we're just going to continue to see that.
Right. And I believe at one point we were actually even thinking about the option of hotels being able to take housing vouchers. Like, that was a real conversation that happened at one point, and it's like, what else can we do? We don't want people living in hotels.
Right.
We don't.
Turns out if you take a homeless person and put them in a home, you're not homeless anymore.
Problem solved right there.
Okay, cool.
I'm sorry.
No,
You're fine.
okay. Kick off what you said about people leaving Battle Creek. Yeah, I feel like, especially the younger generation, I was one of them, unfortunately. But you just feel like there's not a lot of opportunity here. Because either it's housing, transportation, jobs, schooling. So it's like, how can we all? I don't know. I'd rather see us all work together, regardless of the problems that we have against each other. But,
Very true.
that whole unity
Absolutely.
What strategies can be implemented to encourage students, youth, and young professionals from underrepresented communities to encourage them to pursue careers in fields where they have historically been excluded?
Yep. Go ahead.
Wait, can you repeat the question?
So pretty much, how do we get young people into careers and fields where they have been historically excluded from? Like, we were talking about 3 black realtors out of all the ones here in Battle Creek, out of 250.
It's a horrible statistic.
Isn't it though?
I'm sorry.
It is.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
This question, I asked this question, I went to the Capitol last week when we talked about it with different reps. It is hard to, unfortunately, it's hard to really have people like me or like different minorities and like, becoming like the big career like titles like journalists or doctors or therapists. I feel like honestly, I forgot what I was going to say.
I hate
Right.
that.
I do it all the time.
Well,
Yeah,
one
I'll come
of the
back to you,
things that I think helps is to start young. I mean, introducing kids to careers, elementary. Kids are so advanced technologically right now. Starting early is really important. Like elementary level, realtors go into the elementary
Career
school.
fairs, stuff like that. Yeah.
Just simple, something old-fashioned but basic. A career fair, a city planner. What do you do? Talking to kids on their level, but introducing kids to those different jobs, careers, whatever's at an early age, and keep it going. Tailor it to whichever age group. I'm not saying the kindergartners, but 4th, 5th, 6th, these kids that are talking about whatever issues they talk about amongst themselves, why not talk about how important different careers are and get them started thinking, percolating early, and just keep it going through middle school. And then by the time they get to high school, where at Central they have to choose a career field just to go through. They have to pick a track, maybe by the time they're there, they will do it.
And I feel like we also need to be in our local colleges and high schools as well, because I can name a whole bunch of college kids that are going to college right now and don't know what they want to do.
That's
You
what
know?
I'm saying, start early.
Sorry, I wasn't talking about you when I said that, I promise.
No, I just feel like sometimes we have that, I don't know, being a kid, like we have that lack of motivation. Like we don't, like growing up, I didn't see, I mean, I wanted to be a teacher, but I've never had a black teacher since I got to college. Like, it's like, now I understand, I mean, this is off topic very badly, but now I understand why there's little kids my age, well, little kids, who look like me, or like little kids in different minorities who like get all happy when they see Disney princesses that look like them, because they're like, oh, like I want to be like you when I grow up.
Representation.
Like, you know,
yeah.
So it's like, my bad, I didn't do that. But it's like,
That's honest.
But that's the point,
That's,
though.
yeah,
Yes,
that's honest.
yeah, I don't know how.
I'm telling you, start
Yeah.
in small.
Yeah.
And we've also been talking around in all the other meetings I've been in about introducing BIPOC students to different career fields. I know, like, there's a couple of people in the community that are out actively recruiting for people to do different trades and stuff like that, because even with the local high schools, certain kids are pushed towards college, certain kids are pushed towards trades. Like, it's not even, it's not fair, you know what I mean? And I worked in one of the local high schools in the counseling office, and certain kids were pushed this way and certain kids were just left without information. And then some kids just have to find out through other people. Like, we have to be more intentional about how we are promoting any form of education to our young people. Our trades are dying right now because all the tradesmen are getting ready to retire and there's nobody to replace them. And I know this from actual facts in our city. Like, they need thousands of tradespeople. The construction workers for the road commission is hiring people. Like, there's so many incentives and bonuses for people to come do day laboring and construction work. Like, they're shorthanded, thousands of people, and that's a lot of reason why we have houses that can't get built, is because we don't have enough laborers to do it. We don't have enough skilled tradesmen to do that work. And so that's another thing we have to do. We have to make sure that we're introducing these jobs and these careers and these trades and this other forms of education besides just college to all students. It has to be equally introduced to everyone. My 2 cents.
I got 2 cents in there too. I used to do a lot of work in education, and it just drove me nuts with standardized tests and how they use them to justify closing schools and firing teachers and all that stuff. It don't mean anything. Standardized tests don't mean anything. It's just a convenient way to close schools in black and brown neighborhoods, and and that still goes on. I think they still use standardized testing scores, and it pigeonholes these students into careers that maybe they don't care about. You know, maybe they want to be an artist or a musician or something that. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Every single time.
There you go. Yeah. All right.
Just want to do a time track with 620.
Yeah.
How many
This is the
questions
last
do-
one.
oh.
Yeah. Did you? Okay, so look, that was the last question. Yes, right on time. Perfect. So once again, is there any other comments or responses that we need to make sure that we include in this?
Do I have a comment?
Yes.
This is so nice. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. You contributed so much.
And you will be invited by email back to all these spaces with all these fun meetings. Yay. So I just want to thank everybody for coming out. We appreciate hearing your voice and your experiences and for the work that you do in this community, and just for the work you're putting into building these relationships and creating these partnerships that needed to happen. We needed these relationships and partnerships 50 years ago. But I'm excited to see that they are forming, and this is how we make change for our city. So I just appreciate you all for participating and for coming in and putting up with us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
you.
I have one last ask. So Michelle and I are going to do a PSA to the community of all the ways that people can show up to events that are happening through May, June, any kind of public conversations that are happening, events, workshops, seminars.
So plug your event.
Yeah, so if you want to email me that by the end of the week so we can get it in with the video, I would say by like Wednesday or Thursday.
And that way your events can get put out there into the community. That's an additional way of marketing it.
What is your email?
I think I sent you an email already. That
What's your name?
Victoria.
with
Gotcha.
three-
That would be important.
Yeah, it's important to
I think I knew everybody in the room, but I don't think everybody else knew everybody else
I
in
have
the
a
room.
question. Is everyone on the email too, if we want to follow up
Yeah.
on some of this youth conversation around housing?
No,
I
think we're- yep, and we can add Sanish tonight.
I've never met you before. I'm helping them produce the videos.
I see.
Okay, I'll do like a follow-up email when the
He as
video
in
is done,
Valentine. Yes.
and then be able to send it.
Real name.
Yeah.
And where you work? With the Art and Culture Collaborative.
Oh, okay.
Vannuard. Don't name it.
Don't tell me.
Come on now.
Access Vision. Your voice, your community.